On New Year's Eve, my son Daniel excused himself from the dinner table to take what he called an urgent work call. My 12-year-old grandson Leo, suspicious of his father's shifting eyes, quietly followed him out to the balcony. 5 minutes later, Leo ran back into the dining room, his face pale and his small hands trembling violently. "Grandpa, we need to leave right now," he whispered, gripping my arm so hard it hurt. "I heard Dad talking to a doctor. He said you will not make it to midnight." 15 minutes later, the police stormed in, but they were not there to save me. They were there to arrest me. Before I tell you how I lost my freedom and then regained my dignity in the most explosive way possible, let me know which city you are tuning in from in the comments below. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the very people you raised, hit that like button and subscribe. The nightmare began exactly 20 minutes before the police arrived. It was 7 p.m. on December 31st. Outside the panoramic windows of the house I had paid for, the Chicago wind was howling, whipping snow against the glass. But inside the dining room, the atmosphere was even colder. I was trying to cut a piece of roast beef when my right hand spasmed. It was a violent, uncontrollable jerk. The heavy silver fork slipped from my fingers and clattered loudly against the fine bone china plate. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I instinctively grabbed my wrist with my other hand, trying to steady it, trying to hide the weakness. My heart was racing, a strange, fluttering sensation in my chest that had been getting worse all week. My daughter-in-law, Monica, did not ask if I was okay. She did not offer to help me cut the meat. Instead, she let out a long, exaggerated sigh, dropping her napkin onto the table as if my disability was a personal insult to her dinner party. Daniel, my only son, chuckled low in his throat. He swirled the expensive red wine in his glass, the wine I had bought from my private cellar, and looked at his wife with a smirk. "Look at that, Monica. He is falling apart before we even get to dessert. It is getting worse every day. I do not think he can be trusted with a knife anymore." I looked down at my hands. These were the hands that had founded O'Connor Steel 40 years ago. These hands had welded beams on skyscrapers that defined the city skyline. These hands had carried Daniel on my shoulders when he broke his leg at soccer camp. Now they looked like withered leaves shaking in the wind. I felt a surge of shame, hot and stinging behind my eyes. "I am fine," I muttered, my voice sounding raspy and weak. "It is just a little chill." Monica picked up her wine glass, her manicured nails tapping against the crystal. "Oh, please, Jackson, stop pretending. We all see it. You are deteriorating. Daniel and I were discussing it this afternoon. It is simply not safe for you to be in this big house anymore. You are a danger to yourself." She took a sip of wine, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "We found a place that has a bed open starting tomorrow. Reed's Point. It is very affordable, and they specialize in cases like yours." Reed's Point. I froze. Everyone in Chicago knew Reed's Point. It was a warehouse for the forgotten elderly, a place known for bedsores, sedation, and neglect. It was the cheapest state-funded facility in the county. Affordable. That was the key word. I looked around the room. The crystal chandelier above us cost $12,000. The watch on Daniel's wrist was a Rolex I gave him for his 30th birthday. They were living in luxury on my dime, yet they wanted to ship me off to a place that smelled of urine and bleach to save money. "I am not going to a home," I said, trying to put steel back into my voice, but the tremor in my chest made me cough. "This is my house. I built it." Daniel leaned forward, his face hardening. "Technically, Dad, it is our house now. Remember, You signed the power of attorney last month when you had that dizzy spell. We are just doing what is best for the family. You are a burden, Jackson, a heavy, expensive burden. And frankly, we are tired of carrying you." He didn't see Leo, my grandson, sitting at the end of the table. The boy was staring at his father with wide, horrified eyes. I saw Leo's hand slowly move under the table, clenching into a fist. That was the only thing that kept me from exploding right then and there. I took a deep breath, fighting the nausea rising in my throat. I did not know then that the nausea wasn't from anger. It was from the digoxin Monica had been grinding into my food for weeks. I simply picked up my spoon, my hand still shaking, and looked Daniel in the eye. "I am not going anywhere," I said softly. Daniel's phone began to ring. He pulled it out of his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his irritation instantly vanished, replaced by a nervous, eager energy. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "It is my boss," he lied, his voice too high, too quick. "Big deal for the new year. I have to take this." He walked toward the glass doors leading to the balcony, locking them behind him. The room fell silent again, except for the clicking of Monica's fork. I watched Leo slide off his chair. "Excuse me," Leo murmured, keeping his head down. "I need to go to the bathroom." But he didn't turn toward the hallway. As soon as Monica looked away to pour more wine, I saw Leo slip into the shadows of the curtains, pressing his ear against the glass door where his father was standing. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind Daniel, sealing him out on the balcony amidst the swirling snow. Through the double-pane insulation, I could see his silhouette pacing back and forth, his free hand chopping the air aggressively. That was not the body language of a man speaking to a superior about a corporate merger. That was the frantic energy of a man negotiating a debt. I tried to shift in my chair to get a better angle, to perhaps read his lips, but my body refused to cooperate. The numbness that had started in my fingertips was now creeping up my forearms like a cold frost. Monica did not waste a single second. As soon as the lock engaged on the balcony door, she stood up from her seat at the head of the table. She moved with a deliberate, predatory grace toward the wall-mounted sound system. It was a high-end Bang & Olufsen setup I had installed 3 years ago, intended for playing soft classical music while I read by the fire. Monica placed her hand on the volume dial and twisted it sharply to the right. A blast of trumpet-heavy jazz erupted from the speakers, filling the room with a wall of noise so dense it vibrated the silverware on the table. I winced at the sudden assault on my senses. Monica turned back to me, a tight, artificial smile stretching across her face. "Let us have a little festive atmosphere, shall we, Jackson?" she shouted over the music, though her eyes were cold and dead. "It is New Year's Eve, after all. We shouldn't be so gloomy just because you are not feeling well." It was a tactical move. She wasn't trying to be festive. She was creating a sonic barrier. She knew exactly what Daniel was doing out there, and she was making sure I couldn't hear a single word of it. The music was deafening, drowning out the wind, the fire, and certainly any voice filtering through the glass. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman my son had married. I saw a gatekeeper. She sat back down, picking up her wine glass with a smug satisfaction, believing she had neutralized the threat. She thought I was just a helpless old man, paralyzed by age and whatever poison she had laced my dinner with. But she forgot one thing. She forgot that before I was a sick old man, I was a structural engineer. I knew that every structure had a weak point, and right now, her weak point was sitting under the table. I turned my gaze to the floor, toward the gap between the tablecloth and the rug. Leo was still there, crouched in the shadows. He was looking up at me, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. He had seen his father lie. He saw his mother blast the music. He knew something was terribly wrong. I couldn't speak to him over the jazz music without Monica hearing, so I used the language we had developed over years of fishing trips and garage projects. I rested my hand on my knee where Leo could see it. I tapped my index finger twice against the fabric of my trousers. Then I pointed a single trembling finger toward the balcony door. It was our signal for scout ahead. Leo nodded once, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He didn't crawl out immediately. He waited. He waited until Monica tilted her head back to drain the last drop of her Cabernet. In that split second of blindness, my grandson moved. He didn't go for the main door. He slithered on his stomach behind the heavy velvet drapes that covered the side of the glass wall, disappearing into the dark folds of fabric just inches away from where his father stood outside. Monica lowered her glass, pouring herself another refill, completely unaware that the real surveillance had just begun. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs, praying that Daniel wouldn't look down and see the small sneakers poking out from beneath the curtains. The seconds ticked by on the grandfather clock in the hallway, each pendulum swing sounding like a heavy boot step. Monica was busy pouring her third glass of wine, humming along to the jazz trumpet that was still assaulting my ears. I kept my eyes fixed on the heavy velvet drapes where my grandson had disappeared. Suddenly the fabric moved. It was not the wind. Leo slipped back into the room, moving low to the ground. When he turned his face toward me, I felt a cold fist clench around my heart. The boy who had left the table was curious, but the boy who returned was terrified. His skin was the color of ash. He did not return to his chair. Instead, he scrambled under the heavy oak table, curling into a ball at my feet like a frightened animal seeking shelter from a storm. I felt his small hands grip my ankle, his fingernails digging into my sock. I slowly lowered my hand beneath the tablecloth, finding his trembling shoulder. Leo the First whispered, keeping my eyes on Monica, who was now scrolling through her phone, indifferent to her son's absence. "What did you hear?" Leo's voice was barely a breath, a vibration against my knee. "Grandpa, we have to get out. We have to leave, right now." He was crying, silent tears streaming down his face. He was not talking to his boss, Grandpa. He was talking to a man named Dr. Blackwood. The name hit me harder than the physical weakness. Dr. Blackwood was not a cardiologist. He was a shady general practitioner Daniel played poker with, a man who had lost his license twice for malpractice and miraculously regained it. Leo continued, his voice shaking so hard the words were jagged. "Dad said, make sure the death certificate is ready before midnight. He said the old man will go from heart failure. He said the digoxin levels will look like a natural attack if you sign the papers fast enough." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The jazz music faded into a dull roar. Heart failure. Before midnight. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a violent clarity. The shaking in my hands was not age. The nausea was not the flu. The metallic taste in my mouth for the last week was not a side effect of my blood pressure medication. I was being poisoned. My own son was not just waiting for me to die. He was actively accelerating the process to meet a financial deadline. I looked at the roast beef on my plate, realizing it was a loaded weapon. I looked at Monica, who was checking her reflection in a spoon. She knew. She was the pharmacist in the family. She was the one who prepared my daily pill organizer. They were in this together. A cold fury replaced the fear in my veins. They thought I was a helpless victim, a fading shadow in the corner of their lives. They did not know that their conversation had just given me the one thing I needed to fight back. They had given me the truth. I squeezed Leo's shoulder, signaling him to stay hidden. I was not going to die tonight, but someone was going to pay. I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt like lead pipes, heavy and unresponsive, but the adrenaline of survival was starting to override the poison in my blood. "I need to lie down," I announced, my voice raspy. The noise from the jazz music was still pounding against the walls. Monica did not even look up from her phone. She just waved a dismissive hand as if shooing away a fly. "Go ahead, Jackson," she said loudly, without turning around. "Do not expect us to check on you. We are going to enjoy our evening." I reached down and took Leo's cold hand in mine. "Come on, Leo," I said. "Help your grandfather up the stairs." It was a ruse. We were not going upstairs. The second we were out of the dining room and out of Monica's line of sight, I squeezed Leo's hand and steered us sharply to the left toward the kitchen. The kitchen had a service door that led to the garage and the back garden. It was the escape route I used to take when I wanted to sneak out for a late-night cigar without Beatrice catching me. We moved as fast as my failing body would allow. The house I had built, the house where I had raised my family, suddenly felt like a labyrinth designed to trap me. We reached the heavy oak door of the mudroom. I let go of Leo's hand and reached for the electronic keypad on the wall. My fingers were trembling, but I knew the code. It was 1980, the year I founded my company. I punched the numbers in. 1980. Instead of the satisfying click of the deadbolt retracting, a harsh electronic buzzer sounded. A red light flashed on the panel. Access denied. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. I tried again, thinking my shaking fingers had hit the wrong key. 1980. Access denied. The red light pulsed, mocking me. "Going somewhere, Dad?" The voice came from the shadows of the hallway behind us. I spun around, nearly losing my balance. Daniel was standing at the foot of the stairs, leaning casually against the banister. He had taken off his jacket and loosened his tie. His face was flushed with the cold from the balcony and the excitement of his plotting. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand and a small remote control in the other. "I changed the codes this afternoon," Daniel said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You know, for security purposes." "The neighborhood is changing, Dad. You can never be too careful. Can't have you wandering out into the snow in your condition. You might get lost. Or worse, you might tell someone something foolish." His eyes were dead. There was no warmth, no son looking at his father. There was only a jailer looking at a prisoner. I looked at the remote in his hand. It was the master control for the smart home system I had paid $50,000 to install. With one button, he had sealed every exit. The windows were reinforced glass. The doors were solid oak. I had built a fortress to keep the world out. But now I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that I had built my own coffin. "We are just going to my room, Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to protect Leo, who was pressing himself against my back. Daniel smiled a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good idea. Go upstairs. Go to bed, Dad, and stay there. It will all be over soon." He took a step toward us, blocking the path to the front door. I realized then that there was no way out. We were trapped in a cage of velvet and gold, and the executioner was standing right in front of us, holding a glass of whiskey. I tightened my grip on Leo's hand. We had to get to the second floor, not to sleep, but to find the one thing Daniel had forgotten about, the one thing that might save us. We retreated to my master bedroom, the only place left where I felt a semblance of control. Leo sat on the edge of my king-sized bed, his legs swinging nervously while I paced the Persian rug, trying to think through the fog in my brain. The door handle turned. It was not locked. I had not locked it because I knew Daniel would just kick it down and claim I was having a medical emergency. Monica breezed into the room. She had changed out of her dinner dress into something more comfortable, but the look in her eyes was anything but comforting. She held a silver tray in her hands. On it sat a single tall glass of steaming warm milk. "I brought you something to help you settle down, Jackson," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern that made my skin crawl. "You are so agitated tonight. This will help you sleep." She walked toward me, extending the tray. The steam rising from the glass carried a scent that hit me instantly. It was not the smell of dairy or nutmeg. It was a sharp, cloying odor of bitter almonds. I had worked in industrial manufacturing long enough to know that smell. It was the scent of chemicals. It was the scent of a lethal dose. I stared at the white liquid swirling in the glass. It looked innocent enough, but I knew that if I drank it, I would never wake up. My heart would simply stop, just as Daniel had promised the doctor on the phone. "I am not thirsty, Monica," I said, backing away until my legs hit the electric fireplace mantel. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. The smile dropped from her face for a fraction of a second, revealed the cold impatience beneath. "Drink it, Jackson. You need to rest. Daniel is very worried about you. We all are. Do not make this difficult." She thrust the glass toward my chest, forcing me to take it or let it spill on my shirt. I reached out my hand, trembling violently. This time, I did not have to fake the shaking. My body was vibrating with fear and rage. I took the warm glass. The heat radiated into my cold palms. Monica watched me intently, her eyes fixated on the rim of the glass, waiting for it to touch my lips. She was holding her breath. She wanted this over. She wanted her inheritance, and she wanted it now. I raised the glass slowly. I looked at Leo over the rim, seeing the terror in his eyes. I could not leave him alone with these monsters. I let out a sudden ragged cough. It started deep in my chest, a spasm that shook my entire frame. As I doubled over, I deliberately let my arm jerk wildly to the right. The glass flew from my fingers. It did not hit the floor. It smashed directly into the glowing coils of the electric heater built into the wall. There was a loud hiss, followed by a violent crackle of sparks. The milk hit the red-hot heating elements and instantly vaporized, sending a plume of acrid black smoke into the room. The smell was immediate and undeniable. It did not smell like burnt milk. It smelled like burning plastic and harsh chemical runoff. Monica shrieked, jumping back as sparks flew onto the expensive rug. "Look what you did, you clumsy old fool!" she screamed, her mask of kindness completely shattering. "You ruined the heater! That is a vintage unit!" I leaned against the wall, clutching my chest, gasping for air, not from the cough, but from the realization of how close I had just come to dying. "I am sorry," I wheezed. "My hands, I cannot control them." Monica glared at me, her chest heaving. She looked at the mess on the floor, then at the smoking heater. "Stay right there," she hissed. "Do not move a muscle." I have to get a towel before this ruins the hardwood." She spun on her heel and stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I listened to her footsteps fading down the hall. I looked at Leo. The smoke was still swirling around us, a toxic reminder of their intentions. We had maybe 2 minutes before she came back. 2 minutes to find the weapon that would save our lives. I turned toward the heavy mahogany wardrobe in the corner. "Help me move this, Leo," I whispered. "The floorboard is underneath." The moment the bedroom door clicked shut behind Monica, I grabbed Leo by the shoulder. We did not have 2 minutes. We had maybe 60 seconds before she returned with a towel and a renewed rage. I pointed to the heavy mahogany wardrobe standing in the corner. It was a massive piece of furniture inherited from my father, but it hid the only secret in this house that Daniel did not know about. "Help me push," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the crackling of the ruined heater. Leo dug his small heels into the carpet, and together we shoved the heavy wood. My muscles screamed in protest. The poison in my system made my limbs feel like they were submerged in water, but adrenaline is a powerful antidote. We managed to slide the wardrobe just enough to reveal the floorboards underneath. I fell to my knees, ignoring the sharp pain in my joints. I dug my fingernails into the seam of the hardwood floor. To anyone else, it looked like a standard oak plank. But I had designed this house. I knew that if you pressed on the third knot in the wood, the locking mechanism would disengage. There was a soft click. I pried the board up, revealing a hollow space filled with insulation and a small, rusted metal lockbox. My hands shook violently as I opened the lid. Inside lay a prepaid burner phone and a thick manila envelope containing the original deed to the house and the trust fund documents I had hidden years ago. I grabbed the phone, my thumb pressing hard on the power button. I prayed for a light, a vibration, anything. But the screen remained stubbornly black. It had been sitting there for 3 years. The battery was completely drained. A curse died in my throat. The one lifeline to the outside world was useless. I could hear footsteps starting up the stairs again, heavy and fast. She was coming back. I looked at the phone, then at Leo. I had to improvise. I unclasped the smartwatch from my wrist. It was a high-tech gift Daniel had given me to track my heart rate. Ironically, the very thing he was trying to stop. I shoved it into Leo's hand. "This has a voice recorder app," I whispered urgently, my eyes locking onto his. "Turn it on. Do not stop recording, no matter what you hear. Even if I scream, even if I fall, you keep recording." I took the manila envelope and shoved it deep between the mattress and the box spring of the bed. Then, with a grunt of exertion, I dragged the wardrobe back into place, covering the loose floorboard. The secret was safe, but we were not. The footsteps were in the hallway now. "Get in the closet," I commanded, pushing Leo toward the walk-in wardrobe filled with my old suits. "Hide behind my winter coats. Go all the way to the back. Do not come out until you see a police badge. Not for me, not for your father. Only for the police." Leo looked at me, tears streaming down his face, his small body trembling with terror. He wanted to stay. He wanted to help. But he nodded, understanding that he was the only witness I had left. He slipped into the darkness of the closet and pulled the door shut, just as the handle of the bedroom door began to turn. I collapsed onto the bed, trying to steady my breathing, waiting for the monster to return. The silence in the bedroom was shattered, not by Monica returning with a towel, but by a sound that usually brings relief to those in danger. Sirens. Blue and red lights flashed against the snow outside the window, painting the walls in a chaotic rhythm of strobe effects. For a fleeting second, I felt a surge of hope. Had Leo managed to call them? But then the cold logic of the timeline hit me. Daniel had made a call 20 minutes ago. He had not called a client. He had called 911. The heavy front door downstairs burst open with a crash that shook the floorboards. I heard the distinct, authoritative shout of, "Police department, open up!" And then the door to my bedroom flew open with a violence that cracked the wood frame. It was Daniel, but he was not the smug executioner sipping whiskey anymore. In front of my eyes, he performed a transformation that was more terrifying than any threat he could have whispered. He grabbed the collar of his expensive Italian dress shirt and ripped it open with both hands, popping buttons onto the hardwood floor. He ran his fingers through his styled hair, making it look wild and disheveled. He even scratched his own neck, leaving bright red welts against his skin. Then he screamed. It was a blood-curdling sound of fake terror that echoed through the house. "Help me, please, officer, up here! He is having a psychotic break! He is trying to kill us!" He looked at me one last time before the heavy footsteps of the police reached the landing. For a split second, the mask of terror slipped and he winked, a cold, soulless wink that said, "I won." Then he threw himself backward onto the floor, crawling away from me on his hands and knees, acting as if I were a monster looming over him. Two uniformed officers stormed into the room with their guns drawn. Their tactical flashlights blinded me, cutting through the gloom. I was just an old man sitting on the edge of a bed, trying to catch my breath, fighting the poison in my veins. But to them, I was a threat. "Freeze! Put your hands where I can see them, right now!" One of the officers shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls. I slowly raised my trembling hands. The hands that Monica claimed were too weak to hold a fork were now apparently dangerous enough to strangle a grown man. I sat perfectly still, blinking against the harsh light. "Officer, please be careful," Daniel sobbed from the floor, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He has been off his meds for weeks. He thinks I am trying to steal his money. He attacked me. He attacked his own son. Look at my neck. He tried to choke me." I watched this performance, paralyzed not by fear, but by a profound heartbreak that hurt more than the digoxin. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had sat up with when he had fevers. Now he was weaponizing the very law meant to protect me, to seal my fate. I looked toward the closet door where Leo was hiding, praying the boy would stay quiet. I could not let him see his father like this. I could not let him see his grandfather being treated like a criminal in the home he built. The officer moved toward me with his hand resting on his holster. I saw the nameplate on his chest, but my vision was too blurry from the poison to read it. "Do not move," he commanded, his voice tight with adrenaline. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in the silence. The officer spun me around, pushing my face against the floral wallpaper of the bedroom I had shared with my late wife. I felt his hands patting down my sides, rough and impersonal. When he reached the right pocket of my smoking jacket, he froze. "Weapon," he shouted, alerting his partner, who immediately trained his gun on the back of my head. He reached into my pocket and pulled out a silver-handled paring knife with a 3-inch blade. It was the same knife Monica had used to slice lemons for her tea just an hour ago. I stared at the blade glinting in the harsh tactical light, reflecting the terror of the moment. I had not put that there. I had not touched a knife all evening because my hands were shaking too much to hold one. It was Monica. She must have slipped it in when she leaned close to threaten me with the milk, or perhaps when she brushed past me earlier in the evening. It was a clumsy plant, but in the heat of the moment, with a hysterical victim on the floor, It was damning evidence. Daniel let out a strangled sob from the floor, crawling backward until his back hit the wardrobe. "Oh God, he had a knife," he wailed, his voice cracking perfectly. He was going to stab me. He was going to kill us in our sleep. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with a grief that looked terrified to the untrained eye. To me, it looked like a performance worthy of an Academy Award. He looked up at the officers, his eyes wet with fake tears. "Please do not hurt him. He is my father. He does not know what he is doing. He is sick." It was the ultimate betrayal. He was not just framing me. He was painting himself as the saint, the dutiful son, trying to protect the very man who was trying to kill him. It secured his narrative perfectly. If I went to jail, he got power of attorney. If I went to a psych ward, he got power of attorney. Either way, he won. The officer did not listen to Daniel's plea for mercy. He grabbed my wrists, twisting them behind my back with unnecessary force. The pain was blinding, shooting up my arms and exploding in my arthritic shoulders. I gritted my teeth, refusing to give Daniel the satisfaction of hearing me scream. "You have the right to remain silent." The officer recited the Miranda warning, a monotonous drone that signaled the end of my life as a free man. I felt the cold steel of the handcuffs click shut against my skin. 1, 2. The sound was final. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut on a wolf's leg. Monica appeared in the doorway, her hands covering her mouth in a pose of shocked horror. "Oh, Jackson," she whispered, loud enough for the police to hear. "Why did it have to come to this? We just wanted to help you." She looked at the officer, her eyes wide and innocent. "Is he safe now? Can we come out?" The officer nodded, holstering his weapon. "We have him secure, ma'am. You and your husband are safe." As they marched me toward the door, past the weeping figure of my son, Daniel looked up. For a brief second, his eyes met mine through his fingers. There were no tears. There was only a cold, hard calculation. He had done it. He had framed his dying father for attempted murder to secure an inheritance before the clock struck midnight. I looked at the closet door, praying Leo would stay hidden. If he came out now, they would take him too. Or worse, hand him over to Child Protective Services, where Daniel could easily retrieve him. I had to go. I had to let them take me to save the boy. I walked out of the room, my head held high, despite the handcuffs leaving behind the only witness who could save me. As the officers pushed me toward the hallway, a small voice screamed out, shattering the lies my son had spun. "Stop! You are making a mistake!" The closet door flew open, and Leo charged into the room. He did not look like a child in that moment. He looked like a soldier on the front lines. He held the smartwatch up like a shield, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. "I have it all recorded. I heard them. Dad is lying. Grandpa did not do anything. He told the doctor to kill him." Daniel's face went pale, his eyes darting to the device in his son's hand. For a second, the truth hung in the air, fragile and undeniable. One of the officers paused his hand, hovering over his radio. But Monica was faster. She did not scream. She did not panic. She moved with the cold precision of a viper striking its prey. Before the officer could step forward to take the evidence, Monica lunged across the room. She grabbed Leo's wrist with a force that made the boy cry out in pain, and she ripped the watch from his small hand. "No, Leo, give me that! You are confused!" she shouted, her voice shrill with fake panic. She raised the device high above her head and threw it down onto the hardwood floor with all her strength. The sound of the Gorilla Glass shattering against the oak was louder than a gunshot in the confined space. She did not stop there. She stomped on the debris with her sharp heel, grinding the delicate electronics and the memory card inside into useless dust. Then she fell to her knees, pulling a sobbing and struggling Leo into a suffocating hug, burying his face in her chest so he could not speak. "Oh, officer, I am so sorry. You see what he has done." She pointed a trembling finger at me, tears streaming down her face. "Jackson has been brainwashing the poor boy for weeks, telling him paranoid stories, making him record us. It is part of his dementia. He has turned our own son against us. He is sick. He is so sick." Leo fought against her, trying to pull away, screaming into her sweater. "Let me go! You are hurting me!" But to the police, it just looked like a traumatized child having a meltdown in the arms of a protective mother. The officer looked at the pile of broken glass and metal on the floor, then at the hysterical mother, and finally at me, the man in handcuffs who had allegedly pulled a knife. The narrative was set. I was the villain. She was the victim. I struggled against the cuffs, shouting that she was destroying evidence. But the poison in my blood made my words slur. It only made me sound more intoxicated, more insane. The officer shoved me forward, his grip tightening. "That is enough. Let it go." I looked back one last time as they dragged me into the hallway. Leo managed to turn his head, his eyes red and terrified, locking onto mine. He was screaming, "Grandpa, do not leave me!" But his voice was being swallowed by the walls of the house I had built. I was leaving my grandson alone in a cage with 2 wolves, and the only proof of their crime was now just a pile of dust on the floor. The back of a police cruiser is a cold, lonely place, especially on New Year's Eve. The hard plastic seat dug into my spine, and the handcuffs bit into my wrists with every bump in the road. I leaned my head against the cold window, watching the snow blur past the flashing blue lights. My chest was burning not just from the digoxin, but from the image of Leo screaming my name as I was dragged away. I closed my eyes, praying that the boy was safe, that he had gone back into hiding like I told him. The car slowed down, but we were not at the precinct. I knew the route to the station. I had built the foundation for that building 20 years ago. We were pulling into the emergency bay of St. Mary's Hospital. The driver, a young rookie, turned around looking confused. The radio crackled to life. It was a voice I recognized. A voice from a past life when honor still meant something. "Officer, stick with the plan. Take him to the ER. Do not book him until I see a toxicology report." The back door opened, and a blast of freezing air hit my face. Standing there was not a guard, but Chief of Police Robert Miller. He was older now, his hair gray, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He looked at me, huddled in the back seat, shivering uncontrollably. He did not see a criminal. He saw the man who had hired his father when no one else would. He saw the man who had donated the steel for the community center. Miller reached in and unbuckled my seatbelt himself. I looked at the rookie who was about to protest. Miller just held up a hand. "You think Jack O'Connor suddenly decided to stab his son after 72 years of being a pillar of this city? Look at him, son. He is not crazy. He is dying." Those words hit me harder than the handcuffs. He is dying. Miller saw what Daniel and Monica had tried so hard to hide. My shaking hands were not violence. They were symptoms. As they helped me out of the car, the first firework of the new year exploded over the Chicago skyline. A massive bloom of red and gold lit up the night sky, reflecting in the glass doors of the hospital. Somewhere in the city, people were kissing and toasting to new beginnings. In my house, Daniel and Monica were probably popping a bottle of my best champagne, celebrating their victory. They thought the old man was gone. They thought the problem was solved. I looked up at the exploding lights, my heart stumbling in my chest. I felt a surge of something hot and dark rise up in my throat. It was not the poison. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. Let them celebrate, I thought, as the nurses rushed a gurney toward me. Let them drink my wine. Let them think they have won. Because when I walk out of this hospital, I am not coming back as a father or a grandfather. I am coming back as a reckoning. I watched the fireworks fade into smoke, and I made a silent vow to the winter sky. By the time the sun rises on this new year, they will wish they had let the poison kill me. A young doctor named Patel walked into the cubicle, holding a clipboard like a shield. He refused to meet my eyes, scanning the chart with a grim expression that told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "Mr. O'Connor, do you have a history of heart arrhythmia?" I shook my head slowly. My heart has always been strong. It is the rest of me that is tired. Dr. Patel took a deep breath. That is what I feared. Your blood work just came back. You have a serum digoxin level of 4.2 nanograms per milliliter. I looked at Samantha, who had gone deadly still. I did not know what the numbers meant, but I knew the look on her face. The therapeutic range for digoxin is usually between 0.8 and 2, the doctor continued. Anything over 2 is toxic. Anything over 4 is potentially lethal. You have enough digitalis in your system to stop the heart of a horse. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was no longer a theory. It was a biological fact printed on white paper. My son and his wife had not just neglected me, they had actively tried to murder me. Chief Miller let out a low curse, rubbing his hand over his face. He looked at me with a mixture of shame and fury. I will have a squad car at your house in 10 minutes, Jack. We will pick them up for attempted homicide right now. He reached for his radio, but Samantha's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. No, you will do no such thing. Miller looked at her like she was crazy. Samantha did not blink. She turned to me, her eyes burning with a strategic intelligence that reminded me so much of her father. Jack, listen to me. If we arrest them tonight, they will lawyer up. They will claim it was an accident. They will say Monica made a mistake with the dosage, or that you took the pills yourself in a confused state because of your dementia. Without a recording or a paper trail linking them to a supplier, it is their word against the word of a man they have already painted as senile. We will get them on negligence, but they might walk on the murder charge. I clenched my fists, feeling the IV tube tug at my skin. So what do we do? Let them get away with it? No, Samantha said, her voice dropping to a whisper. We let them think they got away with it. We need the root, Jack. We need the person who prescribed this. Digoxin is a controlled substance. Daniel did not buy this at a grocery store. He got it from a doctor. And until we have Dr. Blackwood in cuffs alongside your son, the job is not done. I looked at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks. She was right. I was an engineer. You do not fix a crumbling building by painting over the cracks. You dig down to the foundation. I looked at Miller, then at Samantha. I nodded once. Okay, we do it your way. But I am not going back to that house to die. I am going back to that house to burn it down around them. Samantha reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder that looked heavy with secrets. She placed it on the hospital tray table with a thud that made me jump. Her face was grim as she opened the file, revealing a chaotic spread of surveillance photos, bank statements, and grainy images of men who looked like they broke kneecaps for a living. "You were right to feel unsafe, Jack," she said, her voice tight. "Daniel is not just greedy, he is desperate. And a desperate man is the most dangerous animal on earth." She tapped a finger on a spreadsheet filled with red ink. "I had my investigator run a deep financial background check on your son the moment Miller called me. Daniel is drowning, Jack. He is underwater by $3.2 million. I stared at the number, my mind struggling to comprehend it. 3 million. I knew Daniel was bad with money. I knew he liked to gamble on sports and dabble in cryptocurrency. But this was not bad luck. This was a catastrophe. He got involved with a high-stakes underground poker ring run by an Eastern European syndicate out of South Chicago, Samantha explained. He borrowed money to cover his losses. Then he borrowed more to try and win it back. The interest rates are criminal, and the people he owes do not send collection letters. They send hitmen. She flipped the page to show a document that made my blood run cold. It was a property deed. My property deed. At the bottom of the page was a signature that looked exactly like mine. It was a perfect forgery. "He forged your signature 3 months ago to take out a second mortgage on the house," she said quietly. "He handed the cash straight to the sharks, but it was not enough. The interest ate it up in weeks. Now the principal is due." She looked at her watch and then at me. "The deadline is tomorrow morning, Jack, January 1st. If he does not pay the full $3.2 million by noon, the syndicate takes everything. They will take the house. They will likely take his life. And that is why tonight happened." The pieces finally clicked into place. The rush, the desperation, the doctor on the phone. It was never about the house being too big or me being too old. It was about my life insurance policy. "I have a $5 million policy," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I took it out 10 years ago to make sure the business would survive if I died. Daniel is the sole beneficiary." Samantha nodded. "Exactly. If you die of natural causes before midnight tonight, the policy pays out immediately. Daniel pays off the mob, keeps the house, and walks away with nearly $2 million in profit. You are not a father to him anymore, Jack. You are just a walking ATM machine that needs to be broken open." I leaned back against the pillows, feeling a tear slide down my cheek. It was a tear of mourning. I was mourning the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. That boy was dead. He had been replaced by a monster who looked at his own father and saw nothing but a deadline. Miller stood up, his hand resting on his gun. "That is enough for me. Forgery, fraud, attempted murder. I am going to pick him up." "No," I said, sitting up straighter. The weakness was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "If you arrest him now, he is just a desperate debtor. We need to catch him in the act of being a monster. We need him to confess to the forgery and the poisoning." I looked at Samantha. "Give me the discharge papers. I am going home. I am going to give my son exactly what he wants. A helpless old man to prey on. But this time, the prey bites back." Samantha looked at me as if I had finally lost my mind. She gripped the edge of the hospital bed, her knuckles turning white. "You cannot be serious, Jack. You want to go back there? To the house where they poisoned you? To the people who tried to stop your heart less than 4 hours ago? That is not a strategy. That is suicide." I shook my head slowly, sitting up and swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The dizziness was still there, but it was manageable now. It is not suicide, Samantha. It is a Trojan horse. If we arrest them now, Daniel claims he is just a bad debtor, and Monica claims the overdose was an accident. They get a slap on the wrist, and I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. No, I need to be inside the walls. I need to catch them confident. I need them to believe that the poison actually worked. Samantha hesitated, her eyes searching mine for any sign of the confusion I was about to feign. You are going to pretend the digoxin scrambled your brain. Exactly, I said, standing up and steadying myself against the IV pole. They want a senile old man who forgets to sign checks and doesn't know what day it is. I am going to give them exactly that. I will be the confused, helpless father they can manipulate. And while they are busy high-fiving each other, I will be recording every word. I will find out where the money is going. I will get the name of the syndicate leader. And I will get Monica to admit she spiked that milk. Miller stepped forward, handing me my clothes in a plastic bag. I do not like it, Jack. If they try again, we might not get there in time. I took the bag, my hands steady for the first time all night. They won't try again tonight. They think they have time now. They think my mind is gone, so they can just have me sign the papers tomorrow. An hour later, a taxi dropped me off in front of the house. It looked peaceful under the fresh layer of snow, but I knew it was a nest of vipers. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting my mouth hang slightly open. I shuffled toward the front door, dragging my feet. When I rang the bell, I waited. The door opened. Daniel stood there. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His face was pale, and he was still wearing the torn shirt from his performance for the police. "Dad," he stammered, blocking the entrance. "What are you doing here? The police took you." I looked at him with a vacant, watery stare. I blinked slowly, tilting my head. "Daniel? Is that you, son?" I think I missed dinner. Why are the police here? Is it Christmas already?" Daniel stared at me, his eyes widening. Then he looked over my shoulder to see if anyone was with me. When he saw the empty driveway, a slow, relieved smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator, realizing the trap hadn't sprung. He grabbed my arm, pulling me inside, not with care, but with ownership. "Yeah, Dad, it is okay. You just had a little episode. Come inside. You missed dinner, but don't worry. We will take care of everything." He closed the door, and the lock clicked shut. I was back in hell, but this time I was the devil in disguise. The morning sun sliced through the foyer windows, blindingly bright and exposing the dust motes dancing in the air of the silent house. I stood in the hallway, letting my shoulders slump forward until my spine curved into the posture of a man defeated by time. My hand trembled as I reached out to touch the coat rack, staring at it as if I had never seen it before. Daniel guided me into the living room, his grip firm and possessive. Monica was sitting on the sofa nursing a mug of coffee. She looked up, her eyes sharp and assessing, searching for the man who had thrown a glass of milk into the heater last night. I gave her nothing. I offered a vacuous, watery smile and blinked slowly. "Good morning, Beatrice," I mumbled, using my late wife's name. "Is the turkey ready yet? I think I smell stuffing." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of victory. Monica slowly lowered her coffee mug. She looked at Daniel, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, not even bothering to lower her voice. "He thinks I am his dead wife. He thinks it is Thanksgiving. The doctor was right. The episode last night must have caused a series of mini-strokes. His brain is fried. Daniel walked over to her, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and relief. "It is the digoxin," he said casually, talking about me as if I were a piece of furniture. Blackwood said that at high doses in a geriatric patient, it can cause delirium and permanent cognitive decline. We did not kill him, Monica. We just accelerated his retirement. He laughed, a dry bark of a sound. This makes everything easier. We do not even need to force him to sign the papers. We just tell him it is an autograph for a fan. They guided me to the armchair, the one I had sat in to read stories to Leo. I sat down heavily, letting my mouth hang slightly open, staring blankly at the unlit fireplace. Inside my mind, however, I was sharper than I had been in 20 years. I was recording every word, every tone, every confession. They were so arrogant. They thought the castle was theirs because the king was asleep. They did not realize the king was just waiting for them to drop their guard. "Is Leo up yet?" I asked, my voice slurring intentionally. "I want to show him the thing." I patted my pockets, looking confused. "I lost the thing." Monica rolled her eyes. "Leo is in his room, Jackson, and he is staying there until he learns to stop telling lies to the police." She stood up, smoothing her silk robe. "I am going to call the notary. Get the papers ready, Daniel. Let us get this over with before lunch." I watched them move around the room, claiming my space, claiming my life. I let my head drop to my chest as if dozing off, but through my eyelashes, I watched Daniel open the safe behind the painting. I memorized the combination. Left 3 turns, right 2, left 1. I was not asleep. I was memorizing the map to their destruction. The doorbell rang at exactly noon, cutting through the tense atmosphere of the living room like a knife. Daniel jumped, his skin pale and sweaty. He smoothed his hair and rushed to the door with a desperate eagerness that made my stomach turn. He was not greeting guests. He was greeting his executioners. 3 men walked into my foyer. Daniel introduced them loudly as business associates from the city, but I knew better. They did not smell like boardroom meetings. They smelled of stale tobacco, expensive cologne, and violence. The leader was a heavy-set man with cold, dead eyes who walked into my home without wiping his snowy boots on the mat. He looked around the high ceilings and the crystal chandelier with a sneer of appraisal, calculating the liquidation value of my life. "Nice place, Danny," the man said, his voice rough like gravel. "A bit dusty, though." He cleared his throat, and without breaking eye contact with my son, he spat a wad of phlegm directly onto the Persian rug in the center of the hallway. It was a rug Beatrice had brought back from our honeymoon in Istanbul 40 years ago. My hands curled into fists at my sides. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab the antique fire poker and drive these animals out of my sanctuary. But I did not move. I stood frozen, my mouth hanging slightly open, maintaining the facade of the confused old man. Daniel flinched, but he did not defend his home or his mother's memory. He just laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Yeah, well, we are planning to renovate anyway. Come in, please, sit down." They marched into the living room, taking over the space. The leader sat in my favorite armchair, the leather groaning under his weight. He looked at me standing awkwardly by the fireplace. "Who is the vegetable?" he asked, pointing a thick finger in my direction. Daniel smiled tightly. "That is my father. Do not worry about him." The lights are on, but nobody is home. The meds have completely cooked his brain. He thinks it is 1990. The thug laughed, a cruel barking sound. Is that right? Well, make yourself useful, old-timer. I am thirsty. Get us some water, ice, and make it quick. I felt a flash of pure rage, hot and blinding. I was Jackson O'Connor. I had built half this city. I had dined with mayors and senators. And now I was being ordered around my own home by a criminal while my son watched. But I forced the rage down, burying it deep. I shuffled toward the wet bar, my feet dragging on the floor. I grabbed a crystal pitcher, my hands shaking visibly. I poured 3 glasses of water, letting the ice clink loudly against the glass. "Dad, hurry up," Daniel snapped, snapping his fingers at me. "Don't keep the gentleman waiting." I walked over to the coffee table, holding the silver tray. As I lowered it, I deliberately let my hand spasm. Water sloshed over the rim of a glass, spilling onto the leader's expensive Italian trousers. He jumped up, cursing loudly. "Watch it, you senile old bat!" He raised a hand as if to strike me. I flinched, dropping the tray with a deafening crash. Daniel rushed forward, placing himself between us. Not to protect me, but to protect his deal. "I am so sorry." "I told you he is useless. Dad, get to the kitchen." "Just get out of here." I retreated, my head bowed, acting the part of the scolded child. But as I turned away, I saw the look the leader gave Daniel. It was a look of absolute finality. I heard him whisper as I shuffled away. "You have until midnight, Danny, or the old man won't be the only one having an accident." I reached the safety of the kitchen and leaned against the counter, breathing hard. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. They were here to appraise the house. They were here to make sure the collateral was real. And Daniel was so terrified he had turned his own father into a servant to appease them. I looked at the surveillance monitor hidden behind the spice rack. I had them on camera. I had their faces. I had the threat. Now I just needed to find where Daniel was hiding the money trail. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 times, signaling the dead of night. The house was finally silent, save for the heavy, rhythmic snoring echoing from the master suite upstairs. Daniel was drunk, passed out on expensive scotch, and the delusion of total victory. I threw off the heavy quilt and sat up on the edge of the guest bed. The tremor in my hands was still there, a lingering kiss from the poison, but my mind was as sharp as a diamond cutter. I did not need a cane. I did not need a walker. I slipped out of the room, moving through the dark hallway with the silent tread of a ghost, in the house I had built with my own sweat. I descended the stairs to the basement. To Daniel and Monica, this subterranean level was just a dark, damp place for the water heater and the furnace, a space they avoided because it smelled of old concrete and they were afraid of spiders. To me, this was the nervous system of the building. I walked past the stack of dusty holiday decorations and the boxes of Leo's old toys that Monica had thrown down here to rot. I reached the far north wall behind the massive industrial boiler. Any contractor would look at this wall and see a standard concrete foundation poured to hold back the Chicago soil. But I was not just a contractor. I was a structural engineer who had designed bank vaults and secure facilities for the government. I knew how to hide things in plain sight. I ran my fingers along the rough cinder blocks until I found the one with a hairline fracture I had intentionally chiseled 30 years ago. It looked like a settling crack, but it was a tactile key. I pressed my thumb into the center of the crack, applying 50 pounds of pressure. There was no electronic beep to alert anyone upstairs, just the soft hydraulic hiss of a pneumatic seal releasing. A section of the wall 4 feet wide and 6 feet high swung inward on hidden steel hinges that I kept oiled even in my old age. I stepped into the darkness and pulled the heavy concrete door shut behind me until it locked with a dull thud. I was inside. This was a room that appeared on no blueprints. It was not on the property tax assessment. It was a panic room I had built during the Cold War paranoia, a fully self-sufficient bunker designed to keep my family safe. I flipped the switch, and the room flooded with the cool blue light of LED monitors. The air here was filtered and smelled of ozone and clean electronics. Along one wall were shelves lined with non-perishable food and emergency water. But I was not here for the rations. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair in front of the computer terminal. This was my command center. Daniel thought he had trapped a helpless, senile old man in a cage. He did not realize that the cage had a cockpit, and I had just climbed into the pilot's seat. I cracked my knuckles, ignoring the pain, and woke up the sleeping monitors. It was time to go to work. The blue light of the monitors washed over my face, making me look like a ghost in the reflection. I was not a hacker in the traditional sense. I was simply the administrator of a system my son was too arrogant to realize existed. Daniel thought he was the master of this house because he changed the front door code, but he forgot that I wired the electricity. I typed in the encryption key. It was the date Beatrice and I bought the land. The screen split into a grid of 12 live feeds covering every inch of the estate except the bathrooms. I navigated to the archives. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I needed to see it. I needed to see the moment the betrayal went from a thought to an action. I scrolled back to 6:45 p.m. last night. The kitchen camera, hidden inside the smoke detector housing, provided a crystal-clear 4K bird's-eye view of the granite island. There she was, Monica. She was wearing her silk robe, humming to herself. On the counter sat a bottle of my heart medication and a heavy marble mortar and pestle. I watched in high-definition silence as she counted out 10 pills. 10. That was 5 times the lethal dose for a man my weight. She dropped them into the stone bowl and began to grind. The rhythmic motion of her hand was terrifyingly casual. She looked like she was grinding spices for a curry, not preparing to stop her father-in-law's heart. She poured the fine white powder into the glass of warm milk and stirred it with a long silver spoon. Then she held the glass up to the light, inspecting it for sediment. She smiled. It was a small, satisfied smile that chilled the marrow in my bones. I paused the video on that frame. That smile was the end of my family. It was the death of the woman I thought I knew. I hit the export button. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%. 50%. Download complete. I saved the file to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers and a physical hard drive in the safe. I had the weapon now. This video alone would send Monica to prison for 20 years. But as I watched the file transfer verify, I realized it was not enough. Prison was too good for them. I wanted them to lose everything. I wanted them to feel the panic I felt when the air left my lungs. I minimized the video player and opened the network scanner. It was time to follow the money. The brochure hit the glass coffee table with a slap that echoed through the silence of the living room. It was a glossy pamphlet featuring boys in stiff gray uniforms marching in formation under a bleak gray sky. The bold letters across the top read, St. Jude's Military Academy for Troubled Youth. Monica stood over the table, her arms crossed over her chest, looking down at Leo with the cold detachment of a judge sentencing a criminal. "You leave tomorrow morning, Leo," she said, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "We have already arranged the transport. They specialize in discipline. They will help you get over these fantasies you have been inventing about your father and me." Leo stood by the sofa, his small body trembling. He looked from the brochure to his mother and then to me. I was sitting in my armchair, staring blankly at the unlit television, maintaining the ruse of the vacant, senile old man. But inside, I was screaming. They were not sending him away for discipline. They were shipping him off to a holding facility to silence the only witness to their crimes. They were severing the bond between us to ensure he could never testify. "No, Mom, please," Leo begged, his voice cracking. "I will be good, I promise. I won't say anything else to the police. Just let me stay. I don't want to go." Monica laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "It is too late for promises, Leo. You tried to ruin this family. You embarrassed us in front of the entire neighborhood. You clearly need structure that your grandfather can no longer provide." She reached out to grab his arm, but Leo bolted. He ran across the room and threw himself at my feet, burying his face in my lap. "Grandpa," he sobbed, clutching my trousers. "Grandpa, please, tell her. Tell her I have to stay. Help me, Grandpa." I felt his hot tears soaking through the fabric of my pants. I felt his small heart beating against my leg like a trapped bird. Every fiber of my being wanted to reach down, stroke his hair, and tell him that nobody was going anywhere. I wanted to stand up and roar at Monica to get out of my house, but I could not. If I broke character now, if I showed even a flicker of lucidity, Daniel would know the game was up. He would panic, and if he panicked, he might hurt Leo physically before the police could arrive. So I did nothing. I sat there like a statue, my mouth hanging slightly open, my eyes fixed on the middle distance, while my grandson cried for my help. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Harder than building skyscrapers in winter. Harder than burying my wife. Monica marched over and yanked Leo away from me by his collar. "Get up," she hissed, dragging him toward the stairs. "Stop bothering him. He doesn't even know who you are. Can't you see he is gone?" As she dragged him screaming up the stairs, I looked down at my hands resting on the armrests of the chair. I had clenched my fists so hard that my fingernails had pierced the skin of my palms. A single drop of dark red blood welled up and trickled down my wrist, staining the cuff of my shirt. I watched the blood flow, and I realized that the timeline had changed. I could not wait for the FBI to build a perfect case. I could not wait for the bank to foreclose. I had to act fast. If I did not destroy them within the next 24 hours, I would lose the boy forever. The waiting game was over. It was time to go on the offensive. The man who held the power of life and death over me walked into the bedroom, smelling of peppermint mouthwash and stale fear. Dr. Blackwood was not the family physician I had trusted for decades. He was a replacement. Daniel had brought in a man with shaky hands and a medical license that had been suspended twice for malpractice. He stood over my bed, looking down at me. Not with the compassion of a healer, but with the calculation of a mechanic inspecting a broken engine. I lay perfectly still, letting my eyes drift unfocused toward the ceiling fan. I mumbled nonsense about the weather and called out for my dead wife, Beatrice, ensuring my voice was weak and trembling. Daniel stood by the door, his arms crossed, his foot tapping impatiently against the hardwood. "Well, doctor, what is the verdict? Why is he still awake?" You said the initial dose would induce cardiac arrest within 4 hours. It has been 12. Blackwood pulled a stethoscope from his bag and placed the cold metal disc against my chest. I forced my breathing to be shallow and erratic. He listened for a moment, then pulled the earpieces out with a frown. His heart is stronger than I anticipated, Daniel. The muscle tissue is resilient. He is fighting the toxicity. Monica stepped out of the shadows, her face twisted in a snarl. We do not pay you for excuses, Blackwood. We pay you for results. We have investors coming tomorrow. We have a deadline. If he is still breathing by noon, we are all finished. Do you understand? I let my head roll to the side, drool escaping the corner of my mouth. The spiders are dancing, I whispered, keeping my voice barely audible. They are wearing red shoes. Blackwood looked at me with disgust, then turned back to my son. He is in deep delirium. The cognitive functions are shutting down. He won't remember anything from this point on. He reached into his leather bag and pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. If you want to finish this tonight, you need to be aggressive. The pills are too slow. He handed the vial to Monica. This is a concentrated liquid solution of digoxin. Put this in his evening tea. All of it. It is equivalent to 40 milligrams. Daniel stepped forward, looking at the vial with a mix of greed and hesitation. 40 milligrams? Isn't that messy? It will stop his heart in less than an hour, Blackwood said, his voice low and devoid of humanity. It will look like a massive myocardial infarction. Given his age and history, nobody will question it. Just make sure the body is found in bed. I lay there listening to them plot my execution. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from the drug, but from the pure adrenaline of the moment. They thought I was gone. They thought I was a vegetable. They did not know that the high-fidelity microphone I had stitched into the mattress header was capturing every syllable. I had the doctor. I had the dosage instructions. I had the conspiracy. Blackwood snapped his bag shut. Call me when it is done so I can sign the death certificate. And have the rest of my payment ready, in cash. As they walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the silence and the impending threat of the evening tea, I stopped my act. I wiped the drool from my mouth and looked at the hidden microphone. I had the confession. Now I just had to survive the tea. The house was buzzing with a frantic, nervous energy that reminded me of a beehive before a storm. Daniel was pacing the hallway, screaming into his phone about catering trucks and floral arrangements, while Monica was berating the cleaning crew she had hired last minute. She wanted every trace of my existence scrubbed from the main floor before the investors arrived. The smell of harsh bleach wafted up the stairs, mixing with the lingering scent of my own fear. I sat in my wheelchair by the window, staring at the snowy driveway, waiting for the one person in this world I could still trust. A nondescript van pulled up to the gate. A moment later, the doorbell rang. I heard Monica's shrill voice echoing from the foyer. "You are late! The agency said you would be here by 9. Get to work upstairs. The master bedroom and the guest suite need to be spotless. And do not disturb the old man unless he makes a mess." Footsteps approached my room. Light, quick, purposeful steps. The door opened, and a woman in a gray housekeeping uniform stepped inside, pushing a cart filled with sprays and towels. She wore thick glasses, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun under a hairnet. She kept her head down, looking at the floor. It was a perfect disguise. To a narcissist like Daniel, service workers were invisible. They were just moving parts in the background of his life. But I knew that walk. I knew the set of those shoulders. It was Samantha. She kicked the door shut with her heel and immediately moved to the bedside table, spraying lemon polish on the wood to mask our conversation. "Jack," she whispered, without looking at me, scrubbing a spot that wasn't there. "Do you have it?" I did not break my pose. I kept my head lolled to the side, my mouth slightly open. But my hand moved under the heavy wool blanket on my lap. I pulled out a small black USB drive. It was no bigger than a stick of gum, but it contained the weight of a sledgehammer. Inside were the video of Monica poisoning the milk, the audio recording of Dr. Blackwood confessing to the murder plot, and the financial records of Daniel embezzling the pension fund. "I am going to drop it in the trash can," I mumbled, keeping my eyes fixed on the wall. "It is inside a crumpled tissue." Samantha moved the cleaning cart closer. She picked up the small wastebasket next to my bed. With a practiced sleight of hand, she fished out the tissue containing the drive and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. "I got it," she said, her voice tight. "The FBI is on standby. We have a team 2 blocks away. We can take them down now, Jack. Just say the word and I will walk out of here and come back with a SWAT team." I shook my head slowly. "Not yet. The investors are coming tonight. He is selling them land he doesn't own. If you arrest him now, he claims it is a misunderstanding. If you arrest him after he takes their money, it is federal fraud on a massive scale. We wait for the party." Samantha looked at me, her eyes wide behind the fake glasses. "Jack, you are cutting it close. If they give you that tea—" "I won't drink it," I whispered. "Go. Get that evidence to Miller. Make sure the warrant is signed. Tonight, we end this." She nodded once, squeezing my hand briefly. A violation of her role as a maid, but a necessary human connection. Then she stood up and resumed her scrubbing. As the door opened and Monica poked her head in to check on the progress, Samantha was just a nameless cleaner wiping down a mirror. She walked out of the room carrying the evidence that would destroy my son, leaving me alone to face him one last time. The transformation was grotesque. By 7 o'clock, the sanctuary I had built for my family had been turned into a carnival of greed. Valets were parking Bentleys and Porsches on the lawn, crushing the winter hydrangeas Beatrice had planted with her own hands. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the predatory hum of deal-making. Daniel had spared no expense. There were servers circulating with trays of caviar and a string quartet playing in the corner, trying to give this emergency liquidation a veneer of sophistication. But I knew what this was. It was not a gala. It was a fire sale. I sat in my wheelchair, positioned near the grand staircase, like a piece of antique furniture on display. Daniel had dressed me in a suit that hung loosely on my frame and placed a glass of water in my hand, which I allowed to tilt dangerously to the side, spilling drops onto the floor to maintain my facade. The guests walked past me, offering pitying glances or ignoring me entirely. To them, I was already a ghost. I heard snippets of their conversations. Prime location, zoning permits, demolition costs. They were not talking about living here. They were talking about how fast they could bulldoze 40 years of memories to build high-rise condos. Daniel was in his element, or so he thought. He moved through the crowd with a manic energy, his laughter a little too loud, his handshakes a little too firm. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car, but underneath the silk lapels I could see the sweat staining his collar. He was not hosting a party. He was running a con. He needed that deposit money before the clock struck 12, or the men who had visited earlier that day would return with more than just threats. He tapped a silver spoon against a crystal champagne glass, silencing the room. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned to the fireplace, where Daniel stood with his arm around Monica. "Lady and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming with a charisma I had never seen in him before. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. As many of you know, my father, Jackson O'Connor, has decided it is time to move on. His health is failing, and his greatest wish is to see this land developed into something modern." He gestured toward me with a sad, devoted smile. "We are doing this for him, to secure his care and his legacy." The lie slid out of his mouth so easily it almost sounded like truth. The crowd murmured their approval, raising their glasses to the dutiful son. Daniel continued, his eyes scanning the room desperately. "We are opening the floor for a silent auction. The winning bid will be announced at 11:30. We require a 10% non-refundable deposit wired immediately upon acceptance. This is a rare opportunity to own a piece of Chicago history." I gripped the armrest of my chair under the blanket. 10%. That would be exactly enough to pay off the syndicate and buy him a plane ticket out of the country. He was selling his birthright to pay for his sins. I watched the investors pull out their phones, checking their bank accounts, ready to transfer millions based on a fraudulent claim. "Enjoy your speech, Daniel," I thought, feeling the cold weight of the remote control in my pocket. "It will be the last time you ever address a crowd as a free man." The noise from the party downstairs was vibrating through the floorboards, a steady thumping bass line that sounded like the heartbeat of a beast waiting to be fed. I sat in my room, adjusting the collar of the suit Daniel had picked out for me. It was a size too big, making me look frail and shrunken, a visual prop designed to elicit sympathy. The door opened, and Daniel stepped in. He was flushed with the intoxicating mix of alcohol and imminent wealth. He held a leather portfolio in his hand, the papers that would sign away my life's work. "Dad," he said, his voice breathless and hurried. "It is almost time. The notary is setting up on the main stage. I am going to bring the papers up here for you to sign. It will be quiet, just you and me. Then you can go to sleep." I looked at him, and for a moment I let the mask slip just a fraction. I needed him to believe that underneath the dementia there was still a shred of the proud man I used to be. I needed to appeal to his greed by appealing to his vanity. I shook my head slowly, my hands gripping the arms of the wheelchair. "No, Daniel," I mumbled, my voice raspy but stubborn. "Not here. Not in the dark." Daniel paused, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What are you talking about?" "Just sign the papers, Dad. The investors are waiting." I looked up at him, widening my eyes with a feigned, childish insistence. "I want to go down there. I want them to see me sign. I want to use the gold pen. The one the mayor gave me." Daniel stared at me, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He was weighing the risk. Bringing a senile old man onto a stage in front of 100 people was dangerous. I might say something crazy. I might drool. But then a slow smile spread across his face. He realized the opportunity I was handing him. If the investors saw me signing the deed willingly in front of witnesses, if they saw me smiling and shaking hands, it would legitimize the entire sale. It would be the ultimate insurance policy against anyone claiming fraud later. It was a gamble, but his greed made him blind to the danger. He knelt down beside me, placing a hand on my knee. "You want to be the big man one last time, huh, Dad? You want the applause?" I nodded, eager like a puppy. "I built this house, Danny. I want to say goodbye properly." He patted my cheek, a gesture that was patronizing and cruel. "Okay, Dad, you can do it. We will wheel you out right before the auction closes." You sign the papers, you wave to the crowd, and then we take you straight back to bed. But you have to behave. No stories about the war. No rambling. Just sign and smile. "I promise," I whispered, lowering my head to hide the glint in my eyes. "I will be good." He stood up, checking his reflection in the mirror one last time, straightening his tie. He looked like a king preparing to address his subjects. He had no idea that the jester in the wheelchair was holding the match that would burn his kingdom to the ground. He walked behind me and unlocked the brakes on the chair. "Let's go, Dad. It is showtime." As he pushed me into the hallway toward the roar of the party, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I felt the weight of the remote control in my jacket pocket. I felt the cool metal of the hidden USB drive taped to my chest. He was wheeling me out to sign my death warrant. But I was rolling out to read him his rights. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and betrayal, and prepared for the greatest performance of my life. The noise from below was not the joyous sound of a celebration. To my ears, it sounded like the feeding frenzy of vultures circling a carcass. Through the floorboards, I could feel the rhythmic thumping of the bass from the sound system Daniel had rented. It was vibrating against the soles of my shoes, a constant reminder of the invasion taking place in my sanctuary. I stood in the center of my bedroom for the last few minutes of quiet I would ever have in this house as a private citizen. The room was dark, save for the sliver of light creeping in from the hallway, but I did not need light to see who I was. I walked to the full-length mirror on the closet door. The reflection showed an old man in an ill-fitting suit with gray hair and tired eyes. But as I stared at myself, the stoop in my shoulders straightened. The vacuous look I had perfected over the last 24 hours vanished. The man staring back at me was not the victim Daniel and Monica had created. He was Jackson O'Connor. I was the man who had rebuilt this city after the fire of '82. I was the man who had raised a family with nothing but grit and a welding torch. And I was not going to go quietly into the night. I reached up and undid the sloppy knot Daniel had tied around my neck. He had treated me like a doll, dressing me up for his puppet show. I stripped the silk fabric off and retied it myself. My fingers moved with muscle memory, forming a perfect tight Windsor knot. It was the knot of a professional. It was the knot of a man who commands respect. I smoothed the lapels of my jacket, ensuring the lines were sharp. This was my armor. I could picture them downstairs perfectly. Daniel would be holding court in the center of the room, swirling a glass of my vintage Bordeaux, the wine I had been saving for Leo's wedding. He would be laughing that hollow laugh of his, checking his watch every 30 seconds, sweating through his expensive tuxedo. Monica would be by his side in her emerald silk gown, playing the role of the grieving yet gracious daughter-in-law, whispering lies to the bankers and developers. They were drunk on their own hubris. They believed the hard part was over. They believed the ink was already dry. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black remote control. It was a simple device, plastic and lightweight, but in my hand it felt heavier than a loaded revolver. This was the trigger. One button to switch the input. One button to turn their carefully orchestrated gala into a public execution of their character. I ran my thumb over the source button, feeling the raised plastic. I checked the batteries for the third time. They were fresh. There would be no technical difficulties tonight. I slipped the remote back into my pocket and patted the left side of my chest where the USB drive was taped against my skin. The evidence was warm against my heart. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the familiar scent of the old house, cedar wood and dust. The door handle began to turn. The lock clicked. Daniel was coming to fetch his prop. I sat back down in the wheelchair, instantly slumping my posture, letting my jaw go slack and my eyes gloss over. The warrior vanished, and the invalid returned. But under the tweed jacket, the soldier was ready to fire. The room went dark, save for a single blinding spotlight that cut through the gloom and pinned us against the back wall of the stage. I sat in my wheelchair, blinking against the harsh glare, feeling like a specimen in a jar. Beside me stood Daniel, holding a microphone with the casual confidence of a talk show host. He looked out at the sea of faces, the bankers, the developers, the sharks in expensive suits, and he smiled. It was a smile that dazzled them, a smile that said, "Trust me, I am the future." Behind us, a massive projection screen hummed to life, displaying a sleek, soulless artist rendering of a 40-story glass tower. It was a monstrosity of steel and concrete, designed to sit right where my rose garden currently bloomed. Daniel raised a hand, silencing the polite applause. He placed his other hand on my shoulder, giving it a squeeze that looked affectionate to the audience, but felt like a shackle to me. "Tonight is not just about real estate," he began, his voice thick with a manufactured emotion that made my stomach churn. "Tonight is about legacy." He looked down at me, his eyes glistening with fake tears. "My father, Jackson O'Connor, built this house with his own hands. He raised me here. He taught me the value of hard work and integrity." The crowd murmured softly, touched by this display of filial piety. I stared straight ahead, my mouth slightly open, maintaining my role as the senile prop. Inside I was screaming. Integrity. This was the man who had forged my signature. This was the man who had poisoned my milk. And he had the audacity to stand there and use my name to sell his crime. Daniel turned back to the crowd, gesturing grandly at the picture of the glass tower on the screen. But my father also taught me that progress requires sacrifice. He taught me that we cannot cling to the past if we want to embrace the future. He looked down at me again, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. When I told him about this project, about the opportunity to turn this old, drafty house into a modern complex that will house hundreds of families, do you know what he said? He said, "Build it, Daniel. Build it, bigger than I ever could." He was lying. I had never said that. I would never say that. He was putting words in the mouth of a man he believed was too broken to speak for himself. He was rewriting history in real time, painting himself as the visionary son, carrying out his fading father's last wish. He truly is a great man. Daniel continued, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. A great father who is willing to sacrifice his own comfort, his own home, so that his children and his city can develop. He has agreed to sign the deed over tonight, not because he has to, but because he believes in the future. He believes in me. The applause that followed was thunderous. I watched them, clapping, the investors, nodding in approval, convinced they were witnessing a touching passing of the torch. They did not see the sweat on Daniel's brow. They did not see the desperation in his eyes as he glanced at the clock. They only saw the show. Daniel looked down at me, beaming with triumph. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully turned his victim into his mascot. He leaned close to my ear, whispering so only I could hear. "Smile, Dad. You are a hero. Just sign the paper and go back to sleep. I felt the cold plastic of the remote control in my pocket. I gripped it tight, my thumb hovering over the button. You want a show, Daniel? I thought. You want to talk about the truth. Fine. Let us show them the truth. Daniel raised his hand high, holding the presentation clicker like a scepter. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me show you the detailed schematics of what your investment will build. He pressed the button with a flourish, expecting the screen behind us to explode with images of steel girders and glass atriums. He expected the audience to gasp in awe at the sheer scale of his ambition. But they did not gasp. They went silent. Instead of the architectural rendering, the massive projection screen behind us cut to black. It was not the soft fade of a transition. It was a hard, jarring cut, like a power failure. The blinding white light of the projector beam hit the blank screen, illuminating nothing but the dust motes dancing in the air. The room plunged into a sudden awkward twilight. Daniel froze, his arms still raised in the air. He clicked the button again. Click. Nothing. Click, click, click. The screen remained stubbornly pitch black. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd. The investors shifted in their chairs, glancing at each other. Nothing kills the momentum of a multi-million-dollar pitch faster than a technical glitch. Daniel lowered his hand, his smile tightening into a grimace. "Apologies, everyone," he said, his voice climbing an octave. "It seems we are experiencing some technical difficulties. Just a moment." He turned his head toward the back of the room, glaring up at the projection booth hidden in the shadows of the mezzanine. "Leo," he barked into the microphone, forgetting for a second that he was supposed to be the benevolent father. "Leo, wake up and fix the slide. Press the next button." I sat in my wheelchair, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had not told Leo to do this. I had told him to hide. I had told him to let me handle it. But as I craned my neck to look up at the booth, I saw a small silhouette standing against the glass. It was not the slouching figure of a defeated child. It was the rigid posture of a boy who had decided to stop running. Leo was not fixing the slide. He was overriding the system. Daniel was sweating now. He tapped the microphone nervously, the sound thumping through the speakers like a heartbeat. "Come on, Leo," he hissed away from the mic, but loud enough for the front row to hear. "Stop playing games. Put the presentation back on." The screen flickered. A blue static line shot across the blackness, followed by a distortion of pixels. The audience leaned forward, thinking the show was back on track. Daniel let out a sigh of relief, smoothing his tuxedo jacket. "There we go," he said, regaining his composure. "Sorry about that, folks. Technology is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master." As I was saying, this project represents the future. He turned back to the screen, expecting to see his glass tower. But the image that was resolving out of the static was not a building. It was not a blueprint. It was a grainy, low-light video file with a timestamp in the corner. I looked at the date. It was yesterday. I looked at the time. It was dinner. I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. My grandson had not just swapped the file. He had loaded the gun. I slowly moved my thumb away from my own remote control. I did not need it. Leo had beaten me to the punch. The boy had become a man, and he was about to bring the house down. The pixelated static cleared, instantly replaced by the crystal-clear, wide-angle shot of the kitchen island. It was a domestic scene, filmed in high definition, cold and stark under the recessed lighting. The timestamp in the corner read 6:45 p.m. the previous evening. The image loomed over the ballroom 20 feet high, turning the private act of a murderer into a public spectacle. But it was the sound that made the blood freeze in the veins of every person in the room. The audio feed had been maximized. The speakers, which had been pumping out bass-heavy party music a moment ago, now broadcast the sharp, amplified clinking of a silver spoon against a ceramic bowl. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings like a gavel striking a judge's bench. On the screen, Monica walked into the frame. She was wearing the same silk robe she had worn to breakfast, but in the video, her face was not composed. It was twisted with a focused, efficient malice. She opened a bottle of medication. The rattle of the pills hitting the marble mortar sounded like hail on a tin roof, deafening in the silent room. 1, 2, 3. She kept counting until a small mountain of white tablets sat in the bowl. Daniel stopped breathing. He stood frozen on the stage, his hand halfway to his tie, his eyes bulging as he watched his wife on the giant screen behind him. He opened his mouth to shout, to order Leo to cut the feed, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed by the sheer, undeniable reality of what was unfolding. The Monica on the screen picked up the heavy stone pestle. The sound of her grinding the pills was visceral. It was a harsh, rhythmic scraping noise that sounded like bones being crushed. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The audience watched in a trance. The champagne glasses in their hands were forgotten. The chatter had evaporated. A collective gasp rippled through the front row as they watched her pour the fine white powder into a glass of steaming milk. She stirred it. The spoon chimed against the glass, a cheerful, innocent sound that betrayed the lethal nature of the cocktail. Then she lifted the glass to the light, inspecting her work. And then came the moment that sealed her fate. The Monica on the screen smiled. It was a small, satisfied smirk. She leaned close to the counter and whispered 3 words that the sensitive microphone picked up and blasted across the room. "Sleep tight, old man." The screen froze on that frame, capturing her smile in a grotesque freeze frame. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out of the room. 200 people stood motionless, staring at the woman in the emerald dress who was standing by the stage. Monica felt their eyes. She dropped her clutch. It hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot. She looked around wild-eyed, realizing that her mask had not just slipped, it had been ripped off and incinerated. The socialite was gone. The hostess was gone. All that remained was the poisoner exposed in 4,000 pixels. The image of Monica holding the poisoned milk faded to black, leaving the ballroom in a state of suspended animation. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was so thick with tension that it felt hard to breathe. Daniel stood on the stage, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax statue. He reached out toward the laptop on the podium, his hand trembling violently, trying to find the mute button, trying to stop the nightmare. But it was too late. The nightmare had only just begun. The speakers, which had just delivered the visual proof of attempted murder, crackled to life again. This time there was no video, just a green audio waveform pulsing rhythmically on the giant screen like a heartbeat. The voice that boomed through the hall was unmistakable. It was not the polished baritone of the real estate mogul addressing his investors. It was the slur of a drunk, desperate man. It was Daniel's voice, recorded in the sanctity of his own kitchen. I do not care about the risk. Monica. The recording played the volume set to a level that rattled the crystal chandeliers. I owe the syndicate $3.2 million. The deadline is tomorrow. If the old man wakes up on New Year's Day, I am a dead man. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The bankers in the front row who had been ready to wire millions of dollars seconds ago slowly lowered their phones. They looked at each other with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. They realized they were not at a business launch. They were standing in the middle of a crime scene. Daniel screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with panic. "That is not real. It is a fabrication. It is AI. My son is playing a prank. Please listen to me." But the recording continued rolling over his excuses like a steamroller. The voice on the speakers grew colder, more calculated. "We cannot wait for nature to take its course. The life insurance policy is the only way out. He needs to die tonight so I can get the money. If he is still breathing by sunrise, we lose the house. We lose everything. Make sure he drinks it." The final sentence hung in the air, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Make sure he drinks it. The reaction was immediate and visceral. It started as a low murmur, a rumble of disgust that rose from the back of the room. Then someone shouted from the middle of the crowd, "You sick bastard!" It was the catalyst the room needed. The polite facade of the gala shattered. A prominent developer near the front threw his champagne glass onto the floor, the sound of breaking crystal punctuating his anger. He turned his back on the stage, storming toward the exit. "I am leaving. I will not be a part of this." Suddenly, the room was in motion. Chairs were shoved aside as the guests scrambled to distance themselves from the stage. They were not just leaving, they were fleeing. They did not want to be witnesses. They did not want to be associated with a man who would sell his father's life for an insurance payout. The murmurs turned into open jeers. "Coward! Murderer! Fraud!" Daniel stood alone under the spotlight, his arms outstretched, pleading with the backs of the retreating investors. "Wait, please don't go. You do not understand. It is taken out of context." But his voice was drowned out by the sound of 200 people walking out on him. He watched his future, his reputation, and his salvation walk out the double doors, leaving him with nothing but the echo of his own confession. I sat in my wheelchair, watching the exodus, my face impassive. The rat trap had snapped shut, and there was nowhere left to run. The chaos of the fleeing crowd created a chaotic backdrop, but on the stage, there was only a deadly stillness. Daniel stood frozen, his hands trembling by his sides, watching his life disintegrate on the giant screen behind him. He looked at me, expecting to see the confused old man he had wheeled out here, a prop to be used and discarded. He expected me to be cowering in my chair, frightened by the noise and the anger of the mob. I locked the brakes on the wheelchair with a loud, decisive click. I placed my hands flat on the armrests, pushing down with a strength that had bent steel beams in my youth. I did not struggle. I did not wobble. I rose from that chair like a king rising from a throne he had briefly vacated. My spine uncurled the stoop I had feigned for 24 hours, vanishing in an instant. I stood to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I buttoned my jacket, my fingers steady and sure. The tremor was gone. The confusion was gone. The only thing left in my eyes was a cold, hard clarity. Daniel stumbled back a step, his mouth hanging open. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "What are you doing? You need to sit down. You are sick." I ignored him. I walked past him, not with the shuffle of a geriatric patient, but with the measured, powerful stride of the Marine I used to be. The sound of my dress shoes striking the hardwood stage echoed with authority. The few investors who had not yet made it to the door stopped in their tracks. They turned around, captivated by the transformation. They saw the man who had built this city standing tall amidst the ruin of his son's reputation. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand. It felt heavy and good in my hand. I looked out at the room, at the overturned chairs and the spilled champagne, at the greedy men who had come to feast on my misfortune. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, deep and resonant. "I apologize for the interruption. You seem to be in a hurry to leave, but I believe there is one final piece of business to clarify." The room went silent. Even the people in the back stopped to listen. "You came here tonight to bid on a legacy," I continued, my eyes locking with the syndicate leader who was standing near the exit. "You came with your checkbooks ready to carve up my life's work. You were told that I was a senile old man, ready to sign away his history for the sake of progress. You were told that this property was for sale to the highest bidder." I turned slowly to face Daniel. He was shaking now, tears of panic streaming down his face. I looked at him with no pity, only disappointment. "It is a shame," I said, turning back to the crowd, "because you have been misled. You cannot buy this house. The deed you were about to bid on is worthless. This house does not belong to me anymore, and it certainly does not belong to him." I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out a folded legal document. I held it up to the light. "I transferred the title of this estate into an irrevocable trust for my grandson Leo 3 years ago. I am merely the caretaker. Daniel owns nothing. He has no authority to sell, no authority to mortgage, and no authority to leverage this roof against his gambling debts. The bank he defrauded is already on the phone. The police are already at the gate. The auction is closed." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a finality that signaled the end of Daniel's world. I stood over my son, casting a long shadow that swallowed him whole. The game was over, and I was the one left standing. I watched the blood drain from Daniel's face as he stared at the document in my hand. He reached for it, his fingers clawing at the air like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. I let him take it. He needed to see the seal. He needed to see the signature. He needed to read the fine print that turned his multi-million-dollar empire into dust. He scanned the pages frantically, his eyes darting back and forth. His lips moved silently, mouthing the legal jargon he had spent his whole life manipulating. Then he stopped. His breath hitched in his throat, a strangled sound of pure disbelief. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and vacant. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You were in bed. You were sick. You could not have done this." I took a step closer, my voice projecting to the back of the silent room, ensuring every investor and banker heard the truth. "You thought I was sleeping, Daniel. You thought I was lost in the fog of dementia. But while you were busy meeting with your loan sharks last Tuesday, I was having a private meeting of my own. I had a notary come to the house. I had the city clerk visit me in the garden." I turned to the crowd, addressing the men who had been ready to bulldoze my home. "You cannot build your glass tower here. You cannot dig up these foundations. Because as of 7 days ago, this entire estate does not belong to the O'Connor family anymore. I signed a deed of gift, transferring the land usage rights to the city of Chicago. A gasp rippled through the room. The syndicate leader near the door narrowed his eyes, realizing his collateral had just evaporated. I pointed to the floor beneath my feet. This house will remain as a historical landmark. But the grounds, the gardens, the acreage you wanted to pave over, it is now legally designated as the Beatrice O'Connor Memorial Park. It is public land. It belongs to the people. It belongs to the children of this neighborhood. I looked back at Daniel, who was trembling so violently the papers slipped from his fingers and scattered on the stage floor. You are not holding an auction, son. You are attempting to sell a public park to private developers. That is not just a breach of contract, that is criminal fraud. You are trying to sell the city's property. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. The investors were not just angry, they were horrified. They had almost been accessories to a massive swindle. One by one, they turned on Daniel. The murmurs of admiration from earlier turned into a chorus of accusations. He lied to us. Call the police. Get the lawyers on the phone. Daniel fell to his knees amidst the scattered papers. He grabbed the deed, trying to tear it, trying to destroy the reality of what he had done. But the heavy bond paper would not rip. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and the snot of a broken man. Why, Dad? Why would you do this? We could have been rich. I looked down at him, feeling a profound sadness where my anger used to be. We were already rich, Daniel. We had a home. We had a family. We had a name that meant something. But you spent it all. You spent your honor. You spent your son's trust. And now, you have spent your freedom. I turned my back on him, facing the blinding lights of the exit. The sirens were getting louder now. The red and blue lights were flashing against the windows, painting the ballroom in the colors of justice. I had saved the land. I had saved the memory of my wife. But as I watched the police storm through the double doors, I knew I had not been able to save my son. The sirens outside were no longer a distant warning. They were a deafening scream that engulfed the entire estate. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom did not just open, they burst inward with the force of a battering ram. A dozen figures in tactical gear swarmed into the room, their voices overlapping in a chaotic but controlled symphony of authority. Federal agents. Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them. The crowd of wealthy investors parted like the Red Sea, desperate to distance themselves from the contagion on the stage. Through the center of the phalanx walked Samantha West. She had shed the gray housekeeping uniform and was back in her power suit, her face set in a mask of grim satisfaction. Beside her walked Chief Miller, his hand resting on his holster, his eyes scanning the room for threats. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to clean house. Samantha marched straight toward the stage. She did not look at me. Her focus was entirely on the man kneeling on the floor amidst the scattered papers. Daniel looked up, his eyes blinded by the tactical lights. He tried to stand, to summon some shred of his former arrogance, but his legs refused to cooperate. Two agents grabbed him by the arms, hauling him up with zero gentleness. "Daniel O'Connor," Samantha said, her voice cutting through the noise like a razor blade. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement of pension funds, and conspiracy to commit murder." Daniel began to stammer, spitting out excuses that made no sense. "It was a mistake. I can explain. My father is confused." But the agents did not care about his explanations. They spun him around and slammed him against the podium.
The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was a sharp, metallic finality that echoed off the high ceilings. It was the sound of a steel trap snapping onto a wolf's leg. On the other side of the stage, Monica tried to slip into the shadows.
She had backed away until she hit the wall, her hands clutching her diamond necklace as if it could protect her. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting between the exits. But there was no escape. Chief Miller stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Monica O'Connor," he said, his voice deep and rumbling. "We have video evidence of you administering a lethal dose of digoxin to a vulnerable adult. You are under arrest for attempted homicide in the first degree." She screamed. It was a high-pitched, piercing sound of pure denial. "No, you cannot touch me. It was his idea." She pointed a trembling finger at her husband, who was being dragged away. "He made me do it. He said we would lose the money. I am a victim here." Miller just shook his head, pulling her wrists behind her back. "Save it for the judge, lady." The cuffs clicked shut on her silken wrists, binding her to the crime she had thought was perfect. As they led her away, she passed the giant screen where her own image was still frozen, holding the poisoned milk. She looked at it, and then at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Near the main exit, a scuffle broke out. A small, balding man with a leather medical bag was trying to push his way through the line of officers, claiming he was just a guest. It was Dr. Blackwood. He was sweating profusely, trying to use his medical license as a shield. "Let me through! I have patients to see!" An officer recognized him from the description. He grabbed Blackwood by the lapels of his expensive coat and shoved him against the door frame. The doctor dropped his bag, and it spilled open, revealing vials of clear liquid and prescription pads. "You are done, doctor," the officer said, spinning him around. "We have your voice on tape. You traded your oath for a payout. Now, you are going to trade your practice for a cell." I stood alone in the center of the whirlwind, watching the dismantling of my family. I saw my son being shoved into the back of a squad car, his tuxedo rumpled, his head hung low. I saw my daughter-in-law kicking and screaming as she was loaded into a separate vehicle. I saw the doctor who had betrayed his profession being led away in irons. The room was emptying out, leaving only the overturned chairs and the spilled wine that looked like blood on the floor. Samantha walked up to me. She did not smile. She reached out and gently took my hand. "It is over, Jack," she whispered. "We got them." I looked at her, and then at the empty stage. I had won. I had saved the house. I had saved the money. But as I looked at the flashing lights reflecting off the walls, I did not feel like a victor. I felt like a survivor of a shipwreck, standing on the shore, watching the debris of my life wash away. It was over, but the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers cut through the snowy darkness, creating a strobe effect that made the scene look like a disjointed nightmare. The peaceful silence of the estate had been replaced by the crackle of radios and the slamming of car doors. I stood on the porch, wrapping my coat tighter against the biting wind, watching the final act of my son's tragedy unfold. Daniel was being led down the stone steps he had once walked up with such pride. He was not walking like a king anymore. He was slumped forward, his expensive tuxedo rumpled and stained, his wrists bound behind his back in steel cuffs that gleamed under the tactical lights. The crowd of investors and neighbors had been pushed back behind a yellow police tape, but they were not the only audience tonight. Parked just beyond the perimeter of the police barricade
was a matte black sedan with tinted windows. The engine was running, sending plumes of white exhaust into the freezing air.
Leaning against the hood of the car was the heavy-set man who had visited my home earlier that day. The man who had spat on my rug. The man who represented the $3.2 million debt that Daniel had failed to pay. He was not running from the police. He stood there with a terrifying calmness, smoking a cigarette and watching his investment being hauled away. He was not afraid of the law, because he operated in a world beneath it. Daniel saw him. As the officers guided him toward the back of the patrol car, Daniel lifted his head. His eyes locked onto the figure by the black sedan. In that split second, the color drained from my son's face, leaving him gray and corpse-like. He stopped moving, planting his feet in the snow, resisting the officers not out of defiance, but out of sheer terror. He realized in that moment that prison was not going to be a sanctuary. The syndicate leader took a slow drag from his cigarette and exhaled a cloud of smoke. He did not yell. He did not make a scene. He simply looked at Daniel and tapped his wrist where a watch would be. Then he offered a small, cold smile and drew a thumb across his throat. It was a gesture so subtle that the police officers didn't even notice it. But for Daniel, it was a death sentence louder than any judge could pronounce. Daniel began to scream. It was a primal sound of desperation. "Officer, please do not put me in there. You do not understand. They have people inside. They will kill me. I need protective custody. Please listen to me." The officer just pushed his head down, forcing him into the back seat of the cruiser. "You can discuss your safety concerns with the public defender," the officer said, slamming the door shut. I watched through the glass as Daniel pressed his face against the window, his eyes wild with panic, staring at the black sedan. He knew what I knew. He knew that debts to men like that do not vanish just because you are incarcerated. The interest rates in prison are paid in blood and broken bones. He had borrowed money from the devil to kill his father, and now the devil had come to collect his due. The black sedan shifted into gear. The syndicate leader got into the car and drove away, slowly disappearing into the night. He did not need to chase Daniel. He knew exactly where Daniel was going. I looked at the police car as it began to pull away. My son was going to a place where money meant nothing and survival cost everything. He had wanted to inherit my life, but instead he had inherited a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. I felt a cold, hollow ache in my chest. I had saved my life, but I had watched my son's soul get repossessed. The retribution was total. The hell he had tried to create for me was now the cage he would live in forever. The horizon was a thin line of burning gold, separating the dark ocean from the pale morning sky. The air here smelled of salt and freedom, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the stale scent of betrayal that had choked the life out of my house in Chicago. I sat in the stern of the small white fishing boat, watching the gentle swell of the Atlantic lift us up and set us down. The rhythm of the waves was soothing, a natural lullaby that had finally quieted the noise in my head. Leo sat in the bow, his legs dangling over the side, holding his fishing rod with a focus that reminded me of myself at his age. He was wearing a bright yellow t-shirt and a baseball cap, his skin tanned from weeks in the sun. He was not looking over his shoulder anymore. The shadows that had haunted his eyes for months were gone, burned away by the Florida heat. He was just a boy again. He was no longer the frightened witness hiding in a closet, or the tech genius hacking a presentation. He was just a grandson, waiting for a fish to bite. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the warm, humid air. My heart beat steady and strong in my chest, the poison fully flushed from my system. The doctors said it was a miracle I recovered so well, but I knew it was not medicine that saved me. It was purpose. I had a reason to live now. I had a responsibility to this boy who had risked everything to save an old man. The mansion was gone from my life now. The lawyers told me the city had already begun the conversion. The ballroom where Daniel had tried to sell my legacy was being turned into a public library. The garden where I had almost died was now filled with children playing tag. I did not miss the marble floors. I did not miss the cold perfection of a life built for show. I had traded a castle full of enemies for a small boat with one true ally, and it was the best deal I had ever made. Grandpa Leo called out, turning to face me, his face splitting into a wide grin as his line tugged tight. "I think I got a big one. It is pulling hard." I moved to help him, my movements fluid and pain-free. I did not need a cane. I did not need a wheelchair. I stood behind him, my hands guiding his small ones on the reel. "Steady, Leo. Do not fight it. Let it run a little, then bring it back." We worked together in perfect silence, the unspoken understanding between us stronger than any words. We reeled in the catch, a shimmering silver snapper splashing in the wake, and Leo let out a whoop of victory that echoed across the water. As we released the fish back into the blue, I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of life. He looked up at me, his eyes bright and trusting. "We are a good team, Grandpa," he said simply. I smiled, feeling the corners of my eyes crinkle. "Yes, we are, Leo." People tell you that family is blood. They tell you that you have to forgive because of shared DNA. They tell you that obligation is the same thing as love. But they are wrong. I learned the hard way that blood can be poison. Family is not the blood that runs in your veins. It is the blood you are willing to bleed for each other. It is not about who sits at your dinner table at Christmas. It is about who watches your back when the wolves are at the door. I looked at the endless blue horizon and then down at my grandson. We were two survivors on a little boat in the middle of a big ocean. We had lost people we thought we loved, but we had found the truth. Family are not the ones who hurt you. Family are the ones who protect you until the very last breath. I engaged the engine and turned the boat toward the rising sun, ready for whatever new day lay ahead. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true wealth is not measured by the assets we accumulate, but by the loyalty of the people we hold dear. We often mistake shared blood for guaranteed love. But Jackson's journey proves that family is defined by action, not biology. While greed blinded a son to his father's humanity, it was the pure heart of a grandson that recognized the truth. It teaches us to never underestimate the elderly, for wisdom is a formidable weapon, and to realize that the strongest legacies are built on integrity, not inheritance. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who truly has your back. And never forget to listen to the quiet voices in your life. They might just be the ones saving you.